All right, shall we?
Let's go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Welcome to Why Not Change the World, the RPI podcast. I'm Reeve Hamilton. Today we're talking about engineering, how it can change the world, and why it's worth studying. I'm joined by two exceptional guests, Shekhar Garde, the Dean of the School of Engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Hi.
And John Nguyen, the head of the Department of Electrical, Computer, and Systems Engineering and Russell Sage Professor at Rensselaer.
Hello.
Now, Shekhar, maybe I'll start with you. Why engineering? What drew you to engineering as a field of study?
So first of all, thank you for having me here for this really interesting conversation. You know, when I was in middle school and high school, I loved science. I loved physics, chemistry. I didn't take biology, and I regret that now. And I loved math. And at the time, digital watches had just come out, and I loved taking them apart, especially if my friend had, walked into water with it and it was ruined, and I'd be the person to fix it. I also loved playing with light, and so we had prisms and mirrors and so on. So I liked science, I liked math, and I liked solving problems. I liked taking things apart. And so engineering was sort of like natural choice for me. Yeah.
And John, how about you?
Yeah.
Well, my dad was an engineer. He was a consulting engineer, and which means he's a problem solver. I don't think he has ever met a problem that he couldn't tackle. And so I grew up in Taiwan. So at that time when I was growing up, Taiwan was behind technologically. But my dad had this can-do spirit that I don't, there were just things varying from refrigeration, air conditioning, to how to design a suspension bridge, how to design a weaving machine for wires for highway, just really diverse things. And he always felt he could learn and then come up with solutions. So to me, engineering is problem solving. It's come up with a creative solution. And he also was very entrepreneurial. So he started his own company. So to me, engineering is, I kind of grew up with that culture, and it just seems like a natural thing. It's exciting, solving problem, making impact, and having fun at the same time.
Yeah, and that gets into a question I had where, if you look at the kinds of engineering that are just taught here on the Rensselaer campus, you have biomedical engineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering. What is the common thread through all these things? What is the engineering in engineering?
I could go first. So we are on the campus of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. As you know, we're going to celebrate our 200th anniversary in 2024. And so let's go back a little bit, maybe 200 years ago. Right? Rensselaer was founded by Stephen Van Rensselaer with the goal to apply science to the common purposes of life. And I think I cannot come up with a better definition of engineering.
Absolutely.
To apply science to common purposes of life. So we engineers, all of these disciplines, biomedical, nuclear, mechanical, we understand science, we do math, and then we harness the power of science to solve real life problems. That is engineering to me.
Absolutely. I love that model, applying the science for the common purpose of life. I think that just really wonderful captures the Rensselaer spirit. And to me, engineering is problem solving and improve things. And I think that's really so I always think about, a steam engine. That's sort of the early engineering example, how that sort of builds on each iteration and keep on refining and drawing on each other insight and finally come up with something tremendously impactful. And there are lots of examples today, from semiconductor to cell phone. Engineering is just having a huge impact, and it's problem solving and improving life.
Now, John, your department focuses on electrical, computer, and systems engineering. What drew you to that specifically?
Electrical engineering is very broad, and the fundamental, there are some fundamental principles. So our department is broader than electrical engineering. We have electrical, computer, and systems. So pretty
it's
much
a large department.
It's a large department, and it's intellectually very broad. So you have the foundational, the electrical engineering from the semiconductors, solid state physics, to power systems, how the electricity gets generated generated and transmitted, and how it gets harnessed and to be used. One exercise I like to do with freshmen high school students visiting us is that I try to ask them to imagine, suppose you have a total blackout, you don't have electricity, what will happen? How your life will be changed? And some people say, oh, then I can't wash my dishes, I can't watch TV, then there's no light, so I'll be in the dark, etc. And then one kid finally raised his hand and say, no electricity, no happiness. So electricity really is so fundamental. That means our way of life, our happiness is really predicated on the availability and the harnessing of electricity.
Well,
I think in case of electricity, it might be even more fundamental than that. I mean, happiness, obviously, but maybe no electricity, no modern life.
No modern life, for sure.
Some people argue that electricity is a fundamental human right.
Yes,
that the governments have responsibility not only to provide water and but electricity as well.
Yeah, well, some of my students would say, internet is fundamental human right.
That's right.
Of course, without electricity, you also don't have internet as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have both referenced solving real world problems. I mean, dealing with a blackout is one of those. What are some of the problems out there in the world that you can use engineering to tackle, or that maybe we are using engineering to tackle here on campus?
So I like to do this exercise. You sort of think about the future and make a list of top 3 or 4 big problems that the world is facing. Everybody will have their list, and some energy would be an important part of it. Water may be an important part of it. Human health and mitigation of diseases, climate change, cybersecurity or security of infrastructure. These will be the problems that would land up on everybody's list. And when you think about, how are we going to solve these problems? How are we going to make energy cheaply available? How are we going to mitigate diseases and improve human health? Engineers, I would argue, are smack in the middle of it. You mentioned a whole number of disciplines, biomedical and nuclear and mechanical, aerospace, and so on. Every one of the engineering discipline is rooted in a fundamental scientific discipline, but we know that science. Chemical engineers know chemistry really well, they know math really well, but they're applying that knowledge to solve important problems. They're engineering antibodies, for example, against diseases, or people in John Went's department in ECSC are designing communications devices. They're using artificial intelligence and so on to apply to many exciting problems.
Yeah, and we're certainly looking beyond what's currently available. For example, Shekhar mentioned communication system networking. So we're looking beyond 5G. So right now, 5G is all the rage. So people in my department are looking at the millimeter wave, terahertz kind of sensing and transmission, which can go even faster than 5G.
What does it take to look beyond something that doesn't even exist yet? I mean, how do you look into the future and think, here are the engineering problems we're going to be dealing with?
I think that's a great question. And so let's look back for a moment, and then we look to the future, right? So if you look back 2,000 years, life was stasis for a long time, and then some magic happened. Maybe 225 years ago, the first industrial revolution started, right? And so over the last 200 years or so, as a result of, we're in the middle of 4th industrial revolution, John, would you argue?
That's right.
As a result of these technological revolutions or industrial revolutions, life has gotten better for humanity, right? And so let's just look at the last revolution, which is the digital or cyber revolution, digital revolution, right? I would argue that 3 people who were critical for that are all Rensselaer alums. In fact, they are alums of your department, John, right?
That's right.
So person who invented a microprocessor, Ted Hoff, digital camera, Steve Sasson, and Curtis Priam, inventor of the graphics processor, right? And so what led to that revolution? I would say engineering and physics got together. So it's the overlap of engineering and physics that launched the digital revolution. Right? And so you look to the future and say, what would the next revolution look like? Right? What are the big pillars of the next revolution? And I would argue that it's going to be something in the area of biology or biological systems, then computing, AI, algorithms, smart algorithms broadly writ, and then engineering. I think the overlap of these things or convergence of these three disciplines, engineering, biology, and computing, AI, algorithms, is going to be the, kind of the kernel of the next fifth revolution, if you will, technological revolution.
Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely. And there are people, in Rensselaer, my department, and others are working on that intersection. So part of my own research with my colleague looks at circadian rhythm. How does light and scheduling of sleep affect the human alertness? So suppose you have an exam coming up, so instead of drinking a lot of coffee, so maybe, and you stay up whole night studying, maybe the better thing to do is to schedule your lighting and schedule your environment, schedule your sleep in such a way that your alertness is maximum at the time of the exam. So that's also the type of problem we're looking at. Of course, military is very interested in this, so we're supported by Army to look at this. Yeah.
Well, and that makes me think of this idea we have at Rensselaer about the new Polytechnic, which is all about breaking down barriers between disciplines and sort of all coming together to solve these global challenges. I mean, how do you encourage, especially maybe in the position of the dean, encourage that sort of overlapping of disciplines and getting people to work together? How do engineers collaborate with non-engineers?
So I would say that interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity is part of the DNA here at Rensselaer. We like to say that the walls are very low. But I think fundamentally what drives multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary collaboration is that if you look at any modern problems, I described the energy or human health or cyber or infrastructure security. These are not the kinds of problems where one single professor sitting in their lab or in their room can solve them. It requires people from many different disciplines to come together. And so it's, as leaders, obviously just articulating that this problem requires not only, I'm not sure, John, if you imagine 10 years ago that you'll have in your department a person working on circadian rhythm, for example, in electrical engineering, right? But articulating that this solving a large, big, hairy, kind of complex problem requires people from different disciplines. And there's many, many, many examples. In engineering, big research is done through large multidisciplinary centers. And so you look at any one of those centers, engineering research centers, and that these centers, for example, lighting-enabled systems and applications, LISA. It will have people from electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, physics, and people studying human factors, so cognitive scientists and so on. It's natural for people to get together to solve these big problems.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the culture of RPI. We have a highly collaborative, interactive culture, and so as a department head, I encourage that. And a lot of times, what we collectively try to do is start something small. So we can talk, and then in the hallway with whiteboard, and then how do you take the next step? And in Rensselaer, we have very active undergraduate research program. So a lot of time we will get a very talented and excitable undergraduate student and get that person to participate to start doing some initial thinking, initial results, and then we can collectively take the next steps. So I think we integrate our students into our collaboration and discussion, and it's and a lot of times it pans out into a bigger and better things.
Do you ever run up against any barriers when you try to do this, or what are the challenges involved in encouraging this sort of thing? We talk about it like that's the easiest thing to do.
I think any change is it presents a barrier, right? We don't want to change, and yet if you look at engineering as a discipline, it's been constantly changing, constantly evolving. And so I think the barriers are simply maybe to get people out of their comfort zones to say, hey, I can apply what I do in molecular modeling and simulation to think about how I'm going to bring AI algorithms in there. Or I'm synthesizing these molecules, but maybe, in fact, this kind of application, I can apply my synthesis techniques far better and so on. So it's really, I would say, getting people out of their comfort zones and sort of pushing them to think bigger than themselves really is one of the challenges I face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And to me, time. You can find me more time. That would be wonderful. And I think that's. I look at all the faculty. We all try to do a lot of things. So we write proposal, we write paper, we work with students, and we try to be conscientious teachers and try to impart our insight and knowledge, etc., to our students. To do all this well takes time, and I think that's the biggest challenge. How do you balance with all this demand on your time and your own family? And then keep all the balls in the air. I think that's a challenge, and so people have different ways to deal with it. But I think we all have the best intention. Sometimes we all have a habit of biting off more than we can chew. But I think we'll have. We all want to do all things well all the time.
Now, what are some common misconceptions people might have about engineering or studying engineering? I mean, for me, for example, coming from a liberal arts background, it just seems like this foreign world that I will never be able to understand or really engage with. And I know, Shaker, that you do a lot actually with the arts, and that's an important part of your life. How do you bridge those sort of divides? And
so what are the common misconceptions?
Yeah.
So I'm a father of two girls. I have a 10-year-old and 13-year-old, and I'm already seeing sort of messaging that engineering is not for the girls or something like that. And that's, I think, the really big misconception.
Yes.
Engineering is only for the boys or men. That is absolutely not true, right? At Rensselaer, we've had women graduate in the late 40s. Nancy Deloy Fitzroy comes to mind, who became an amazing leader. And she's a chemical engineer, actually, but became a leader in mechanical engineering. From her to somebody like Hilary Fiorentino, who graduated in 2019, is already working at Boeing and doing wonderful things, right? So we have many, many, many examples of women in engineering doing amazingly well. Discovering new technologies, leading companies, and so on. And so I think this is a big misconception. That's number one. I think the second misconception, and it's kind of amplified by jokes about engineers and so on, says we are boring. We are not creative. We think in a rote manner and so on. Nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, engineers are amazingly creative people. In fact, to solve complicated problems, we have to be creative and empathetic. If you ask Chris Letchford, our head of our civil and environmental engineering department, he says the most important quality as an engineer, in addition to being good in their discipline, is you got to be creative and empathetic. That our Rensselaer Orchestra played at the Carnegie Hall last year, right? And I was tremendously proud because more than 50% of the students who played in the orchestra were engineers, right? We are creative. We love music. We can write poetry, and we can bring it all together to solve problems that humans really care about.
Yeah, I want to come back to what you just said, Reeve, that engineering seems daunting. You have to have some special insight, special talent, and skill in order to get engineering. Actually, I think the key is to take the first step. And that's what I tell my kids is and that's also part of our job is to lower the barrier and encourage taking that initial step. So at Rensselaer, one of the ECSE faculty, Paul Schock, is the head of the Center for Innovation for Pre-College Education, and that's exactly what they try to do. They try to bring the Lego League and First Robotics, but the key is to make it accessible. So you have the tools to sort of gradually remove that fear factor, not all at once, not make it so daunting, but gradually say, hey, I can do this. I can take the first step. And in our curriculum as well, that we want to make it challenging and rigorous, but yet at the same time with an on-ramp. So for people to get into, and it's not to be in an exclusionary club, but to be, there are ways to work your way and grow into the discipline of engineering. And that's what we strive to do.
I wanted to add to you. You asked about how one combines and marries engineering and art as well, right? And John's example reminded me of the the Molecularium project.
That's right.
So for my research, I do molecular simulations of really interesting and complicated systems, proteins and water and so on. And when you look at it on a computer screen, it looks just beautiful. It's beautiful, right? And so you watch these molecules do their dance, and by watching it, we are learning something important about how this protein works, or how might I design a drug molecule against a particular target protein and so on, right? But I also, three engineers got together and we thought, hey, could we use these kinds of media, which are artistic and they're visually appealing, along with audio, to teach young children and maybe everybody a bit about molecules, right? I'm fascinated by molecules, and I think if you understand molecules, you can make anything you want in the world, right? And so we started off with a very simple project where we had hand-drawn objects and so on, made a short movie. And when kids watched it, 7, 8, 9-year-old watched it, they were learning a whole lot from this combination of engineering and art and music. And so we went to the National Science Foundation, and they gave us a lot more funding to make this more professionally. And out of that came this movie called Riding Snowflakes. And the idea was a molecule was going to hold your hand, and it's going to take you through the world around you, a glass of water, a penny, a biological system, and so on. And then that became so successful that eventually we made an IMAX film and a DVD film. It's called Molecules to the Max. And it's a if you have a chance to watch it, please watch it. It's a great example of how music and storytelling and fundamental science, including very complicated molecular simulations, come together to tell story about molecules that is scientifically accurate.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, and so if a young person watches that and they decide, all right, I'm going to do it, I'm going to go get into this world today, what will it look like by the time they graduate? Where is engineering heading?
Yeah. So, engineering is constantly changing. We are constantly transforming ourselves, right? So I look at engineering, and if you just look at the scale of like length scale that we work on, right? We work on tiniest things, single atoms. And we design quantum computers. IBM engineers are designing the next quantum computers. We are engineering molecules like proteins and antibodies, and we're designing drugs from that scale all the way to galactic scales, right? We are sending probes to planets and so on, and everything else in between. And this ability to sample these scales has come from the constant change that is happening in engineering. Things like computing and data and artificial intelligence and machine learning, which may have sounded foreign or something that is not in our grasp a few years ago, are now becoming sort of a standard engineering tools, right? Or we will become standard engineering tools, right? And so it's this adoption of new into engineering is what has kept engineering current and has allowed us to evolve and transform. And so if you are a kid today and you're imagining the world of the future, you can imagine any problem that you want to work on. You want to be the person to go to Mars, or you want to be the person to develop a quantum computer that is accessible to everybody on their desktop. I think, dream big, and engineering will have a major role to play in, fulfilling, that dream, really, making that successful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I want to circle back to what you said earlier, the combination of biology and human health with engineering. I think that is absolutely going to happen. So we'll, in Star Trek, we have those Borgs, right? Cyborgs. And I think that could very well be in the future. And we work with NASA of doing construction in space and to build the next generation spaceship directly in space rather than fly from Earth for the future space exploration. Those may sound like science fiction, but they will pretty soon become reality. And we have faculty looking at human brain, understanding a human brain as engineered, system, and try to diagnose, epilepsy, try to cure epilepsy. So all of those will, become reality one day.
Well, I think we only have time for one more question, but I wanted to ask you each, what is a project happening here on campus, maybe that you haven't mentioned already, that particularly excites you?
We hear about AI and machine learning, and they sound like they're in the realm of computer science, right? What's happening in engineering in AI, machine learning, and data is just fascinating. Mm-hmm. So we are first of all, we are providing courses. So there's a new highly subscribed course in deep learning. There's a new laboratory in electrical engineering in Internet of Things, and then we have research where AI and machine learning is being applied to a whole range of really exciting problems. So, John Christian in our aerospace engineering is applying machine learning and AI to have autonomous space navigation. So instead of sending a signal and waiting for hours to get confirmation that what you wanted to happen, can we cut that tether and have the spaceship or your rover navigate itself through doing AI machine learning? In our Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies, CBIS, and in our biomedical engineering department, there's an amazing group of people led by Ji Wang, Xavier Intez, and Ping-Kun Yan, where they are applying AI and machine learning tools to do diagnostics of biomedical imaging. So can you diagnose diseases? And can you do a real-time intervention during surgeries applying AI and machine learning? In computational area, Jürgen Hahn is applying AI and machine learning to do diagnosis of autism. There are, AI and machine learning being applied to security of airports and infrastructure. I think it's just a fascinating time for merging of this, computation, AI, and algorithms with physical stuff that we do in engineering together.
And it might have been shorter to ask if there are any projects that don't excite you.
Sorry, I took too long.
No, John, are there any that he missed that you?
I want to piggyback on the AI ML. So a particular application of AI is assistive, robotics for handicapped, elderly, etc. And that's a kind of looming issue for our society, for not just the United States, but all over the world. We all live longer, and as we age, we prefer to age in place, in our home rather than going to assisted living, nursing home, etc. So so one project that we have is an assistive robot. So there are many parts to it. One is that how do you infer human intent? So one of the faculty at ECSE, Richard Radke, he's also part of the Cognitive and Immersive Systems Laboratory, and also the Deputy Director of Light Enable Systems and Application Center. So he used a variety of sensors to try to understand the human intent, human gesture, and allow the human more seamlessly interact with machines, such as robots or maybe other machines. So it's sort of like Alexa on wheel and with arm, and then you don't even have to say anything. You just kind of wave your arm and then they'll move your head, and then good things will happen. You will interpret your intent. So I thought that's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, Dean Garde, Professor Wen, thank you for joining us today and talking to us about engineering.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
The Why Not Change the World podcast is recorded in the Soloist Suite at MPAC, the Curtis R. Preem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Thank you to the MPAC staff for their help, and thank you for listening.